Billionaire CEO saw a black waitress defend his daughter from the manager. His reaction shocked all. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into this incredible story. Imagine a luxurious restaurant in the heart of the city, filled with the chatter of high society and the clinking of glasses. A place where the wealthiest gather to discuss their business empires and make deals worth millions. The atmosphere is thick with opulence, and the food? Exquisite. But within this sea of luxury, a storm is quietly brewing. At one of the best tables in the house, sitting with his daughter, was Richard Wesson, the billionaire CEO of WessonTech, a name synonymous with power and influence in the tech industry. His daughter, Lily, a quiet, introverted 10-year-old, was sitting across from him, her face flushed with excitement from the evening. The family was enjoying a peaceful meal, but that calm would soon shatter. The manager, a man named Charles, approached the table with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Richard had been a regular at the restaurant for years, and his presence was almost always met with the same warm reception. But tonight, something was different. As the manager approached the table, his gaze settled on Lily, a girl who had been quietly eating her meal. Without warning, he began to speak to her, his tone condescending, dismissive. "You should be more careful with your manners, young lady," he said, his words sharp and uncalled for. Richard, who had been absorbed in a conversation with a business partner, looked up in shock. Lily's face turned pale, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. It was clear to everyone around the table that the manager's comments were far from innocent. His words were dripping with disdain, and it seemed that no one at the table knew what to do next. But there was someone in the room who wasn't willing to let this slide. Enter Mia. Mia, the black waitress who had been serving tables all evening, noticed what was happening at the corner of her eye. She had always kept to herself, doing her job with grace and professionalism. But tonight, something inside her clicked. She had heard enough of this man's treatment of Lily, and she wasn't going to let it slide. Mia walked over to the table, her movements calm but deliberate. She approached the manager, who was still standing next to Lily, and politely asked, "Is there a problem here, sir?" The manager turned to her with an irritated look on his face. "It's none of your business," he snapped. Mia's eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. "It is my business when it involves one of my guests," she replied firmly. The tension in the air was palpable. Mia wasn't the type to back down easily, and tonight, she wasn't going to let this man, or anyone else for that matter, humiliate a child in her presence. The room went silent as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Richard, who had been watching the exchange with growing concern, finally spoke up. "Is there a problem, Charles?" he asked, his voice cold and sharp. Charles, clearly taken aback by the direct challenge, hesitated. He looked from Mia to Richard, then back at Lily, and finally muttered something about professionalism before walking away, grumbling under his breath. But Mia's actions didn't stop there. She turned to Lily and said softly, "Don't worry, sweetie. You don't have to listen to people like that." Richard, watching Mia, felt a sense of gratitude mixed with admiration. He had never expected someone to stand up for his daughter in such a way, especially not from someone in the service industry. Mia had taken a stand, not just for Lily, but for what was right. Little did Mia know, her courage was about to change everything. Stay tuned to find out how Mia's bravery would not only change the course of this evening, but also leave Richard Wesson questioning everything he thought he knew about people, power, and respect. The restaurant was now abuzz with whispers, the atmosphere heavy with tension. Richard Wesson, the billionaire CEO, watched as Mia, the waitress who had just defended his daughter, stood her ground against the manager. The room felt still, as if time itself had frozen. Richard's gaze lingered on Mia, a sense of awe beginning to build inside him. He had never seen someone in her position, a waitress, speak with such authority, let alone stand up to someone like Charles, the manager who was known for his arrogance. Mia had stepped into a world where she didn't belong, but in doing so, she had commanded the room, turning the tables on the situation. It was an act of courage, one that would change everything. Mia, for her part, didn't say a word as Charles walked off, leaving the tension in the air. She simply returned to her duties, as if nothing had happened. But Richard was different now. He could no longer ignore what he had witnessed. He had to know more about this woman who had just displayed the kind of courage he rarely saw in the people around him. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke, his voice firm but with an edge of curiosity. "Mia," he called out, his gaze never leaving her. She stopped in her tracks, a brief hesitation before she turned to face him. "Yes, Mr. Wesson," she replied, her tone still calm, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. Richard's eyes softened, a silent appreciation behind his sharp gaze. "I want to thank you for what you did just now. That was impressive." Mia blinked, a bit taken aback by the compliment. She wasn't used to praise from people like him, people who had everything. "It was nothing," she said quietly, looking down at the tray in her hands. But Richard wasn't convinced. He had seen her in action, and now, he needed to know more. "No," he said, his voice steady. "It wasn't nothing. You didn't have to do that. You stood up for my daughter, for what's right. That's something most people wouldn't have done." Mia didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded, still not quite able to process the weight of his words. It was as if, in that moment, she had stepped into a new reality, one where her actions mattered. Richard continued, his gaze unwavering. "I don't forget moments like that, and I want to make sure you know that you've earned my respect." Mia's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to say, but she found herself staring at him, feeling a shift in the room, in the world around her. Richard had been a man of power and influence for years, but in this moment, he was speaking to her not as a waitress, not as someone beneath him, but as an equal. The realization hit her hard, and she found herself speechless for the first time that evening. Richard broke the silence with a soft chuckle, noticing her discomfort. "I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable," he said, his smile genuine. "But I'd like to talk to you more. Maybe over dinner, or some other time." Mia felt her pulse quicken. She had never imagined this kind of encounter, let alone with someone like Richard Wesson. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever this meant, but a part of her couldn't help but feel that this was a turning point, not just in her night, but in her life. She finally nodded, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. "Sure, Mr. Wesson. Whenever you're ready." Richard smiled, his eyes lighting up with a mix of admiration and something else, respect. As the conversation ended, he stood, walking away to join his daughter, but his mind was far from the dinner he had planned. Mia had made a lasting impression on him, and he knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of something more. As the evening wore on, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. She had stood up for what was right, and in doing so, she had earned the respect of the one person who mattered most in that room. The question now was, what would happen next? I was walking out of the restaurant when Richard Wesson stopped me. His voice was calm but firm, a complete contrast to the earlier tension. "Mia, could I have a word?" His words were more than just an invitation. They felt like a summons. I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing, wondering what could possibly come next. I turned to face him, and for the first time since our conversation began, I noticed his eyes, serious, thoughtful, a touch of something like gratitude in them. "Of course, Mr. Wesson," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind inside. "What's on your mind?" "You're different," he said simply, almost as if he was trying to figure out the right words. "The way you handled that situation earlier, most people wouldn't have stood up like that, especially not to someone in my position. It wasn't just a reaction, it was a choice." I wasn't sure what to say to that. All I knew was that when I saw Lily being treated unfairly, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to stand by and watch it happen. "I just did what I thought was right," I replied, shrugging slightly. Richard didn't respond right away. He seemed to be weighing my words carefully. Then, he nodded slowly. "It was right," he said, his voice thoughtful. "It made me think. I've spent so much time in my own world, building my company, fighting for deals, that I sometimes forget what it means to truly stand up for people, to show them respect." His words caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to open up like this, especially not to someone like me. "I've always believed in business, Mia," he continued. "But lately, I'm starting to question if I've been wrong about everything. If I've been doing it all for the wrong reasons." I was silent for a moment. It felt strange to hear someone like Richard Wesson talk like this, as if he was searching for answers he couldn't quite find. I don't know what I can do to make things right, he admitted. But I know I need to start somewhere. And I think that somewhere is with people like you. I looked at him, unsure of where this conversation was going. People like me? I asked. Yes, he said, his gaze unwavering. People who understand that integrity is more important than profits, who know that kindness can make a bigger impact than a deal. I want to help you. I want to give you a chance to do more. My heart skipped a beat. Was he really offering what I thought he was? What do you mean? I asked cautiously. I want to help you get the recognition you deserve. I can't pretend that I've noticed you before this, but now that I have, I see something in you. I want to offer you a job at WessonTech. I want you on my team, not just as a waitress, but as someone who can really make a difference. I could hardly believe my ears. WessonTech was one of the biggest companies in the country. They didn't just hire anyone. This was a game changer. You're serious? I asked, my voice a mix of disbelief and excitement. I'm serious, he said, nodding. I don't know where this will go, but I'd like to find out. I think we can do great things together. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. I had been working at that restaurant for years, never imagining that a moment like this would come. A chance to leave behind the life I knew, to step into something bigger. But I knew this was my shot. I had to take it. I don't know what to say, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You don't have to say anything right now, Richard said. Just think about it. You have my number. If you want this opportunity, it's yours. Take your time. I looked at him, my mind spinning, but something inside me told me this was the moment I had been waiting for. I could feel the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't just an opportunity to work at a big company. It was an opportunity to prove that people like me, people who had been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated, could rise above it all. That we could make a difference in the world, just like anyone else. Thank you, Mr. Wesson, I said finally, my voice steady. I'll think about it. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Take all the time you need, Mia. I know this is a big decision, but when you're ready, I'll be here. As Richard walked away, I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. This was my chance to change everything. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. I spent the next few days trying to process everything that had happened. The offer Richard Wesson made felt surreal, like something straight out of a movie. I couldn't stop thinking about it. WessonTech, one of the biggest companies in the country, wanted me on their team. But what did I really know about corporate life? I had spent years working in restaurants, and while I was proud of the work I did, it didn't exactly prepare me for the kind of corporate world Richard was offering. At the same time, there was a part of me, the part that had fought so hard to get where I was, that knew this could be the break I needed. I had always dreamed of more, but dreams and reality had always been two separate things, until now. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee at the small kitchen table in my apartment, I thought back to the night at the restaurant. It had been a simple act of standing up for Lily, but it had changed everything. Richard had seen something in me. He had given me an opportunity that most people could only dream of. It was overwhelming, but I couldn't let fear hold me back. I had to make a decision. Later that afternoon, I called Richard. Mr. Wesson, I said when he answered, my voice surprisingly steady. It's Mia. I've thought about it, and I'd like to take you up on your offer. There was a brief silence on the other end before Richard spoke, his voice warm. I'm glad to hear that, Mia. I've already informed the HR department. They'll be expecting you to come in for an interview next week. The excitement in his voice was contagious, and for the first time in days, I felt a surge of hope. This was real. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was about to step into something new, something bigger. Thank you, Mr. Wesson, I said, my heart pounding. I won't let you down. I know you won't, he replied, and we ended the call. As I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, a part of me still couldn't believe it. The whole thing felt like a dream. I spent the rest of the afternoon getting ready for the next chapter of my life, preparing myself for what was to come. The interview with WessonTech was scheduled for the following Monday, and though I was nervous, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. This was the chance I had been waiting for. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions of my daily routine, but everything felt different. I had made the decision. There was no going back now. Monday morning arrived, and I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that I hoped would convey the professional side of me. The interview was scheduled for 9 a.m., and as I walked into the sleek WessonTech building, I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. The lobby was filled with polished marble floors, high ceilings, and glass walls. Everything about the place screamed success. I had never seen anything like it. The receptionist greeted me warmly, and after a brief wait, I was led into a conference room. Richard Wesson was already sitting at the table, looking every bit the CEO. He smiled when I entered, his expression both professional and welcoming. "Mia, I'm glad you could make it," he said as he stood to greet me. "Please, have a seat." I sat down, my nerves rising, but I kept my posture straight and my hands steady. I had worked too hard to get here to let nerves get the best of me. "I know this is a big change for you," Richard began, his eyes studying me carefully. "But I believe you have the potential to be more than just a waitress. You've shown incredible strength, and we need people like you at WessonTech. People who can think outside the box, who aren't afraid to take risks." I nodded, feeling a surge of pride. This was what I had been fighting for. This was the moment where everything I had worked for came together. "Thank you," I said, my voice more confident than I had felt in days. "I believe I can do this." Richard smiled again. "I have no doubt about that. We'll be in touch soon, but I wanted you to know that you're exactly the kind of person we need. I'm excited to see what you'll bring to the team." The interview ended, and I walked out of the building with a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the job offer. It was about the fact that I had stepped into a world I had once thought was beyond my reach. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a future worth fighting for. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. And with that, I knew I was no longer just Mia, the waitress. I was Mia, someone who had proven her worth, and I was about to change the course of my life forever. It was a week after my interview with Richard Wesson that I received the call. The phone rang early in the morning, and I almost didn't recognize the number. But something about it felt different, like I already knew what it meant. When I answered, it was Richard's voice on the other end. "Mia," he said, his voice warm but with a hint of business. "We'd like to offer you the position at WessonTech. Welcome to the team." My heart skipped a beat, and I had to sit down. I could hardly believe it. This was the moment I had worked for, the moment everything had led to. "Thank you, Mr. Wesson," I managed to say, my voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Richard replied. "We're excited to have you on board. We'll send over the details, and we can discuss your start date. We're looking forward to seeing what you bring to the table." As I hung up the phone, I sat in stunned silence. I had made it. All the hard work, all the sacrifices, had led to this moment. But as excited as I was, a part of me couldn't shake the fear. I had been a waitress for so long that the thought of stepping into a corporate world seemed overwhelming. But I knew I couldn't let that fear control me. This was my chance to make a difference, to show that people like me, people who had been overlooked, had value. The days leading up to my first day at WessonTech were a blur. I spent hours shopping for a wardrobe that would fit into the corporate world, reading up on the company's history, and preparing myself for what was to come. But as I stood outside the building on my first day, I felt the weight of it all. The building was sleek and modern, a towering symbol of the tech empire Richard had built. I took a deep breath and walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was bustling with employees in suits, all rushing around as if they had a million things to do. It was intimidating, but I couldn't let it stop me. The receptionist greeted me with a smile and handed me a visitor's badge before guiding me to the elevators. "You're going to do great," she said. "Good luck." When I stepped off the elevator, I was greeted by the HR team. They were kind and welcoming, and soon enough, I was sitting in a conference room, preparing for my first official meeting at WessonTech. As I sat down, I couldn't help but feel out of place. But then I remembered Richard's words. "We need people like you." That thought gave me the courage I needed. The meeting went well. My background as a waitress, with years of customer service experience, turned out to be more valuable than I thought. I was able to contribute ideas and insights that surprised everyone in the room, including me. Richard sat at the head of the table, listening intently, and every now and then, he would smile and nod. I could tell that he was pleased with my contributions. By the end of the meeting, I felt more confident than I ever had before. As I walked back to my desk, I was greeted by a few employees who introduced themselves. They seemed friendly, and some even offered to help me get settled in. It was a stark contrast to the world I had come from, where I had always been invisible to most people. I spent the next few weeks adjusting to the new role, learning everything I could about the company, and proving myself to my new colleagues. The more I worked, the more I realized how much I had to offer. I was no longer just Mia, the waitress. I was Mia, a valued team member at one of the most successful tech companies in the world. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned if I truly belonged. But every time I felt that fear creep in, I reminded myself of why I was there. I was there because I had earned it. I had fought for it. And I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away from me. Months passed, and as I settled into my role, I began to notice a shift. Richard started to take a more active interest in my work, often stopping by my desk to ask for my input on various projects. I knew he respected me, but it was starting to feel like he trusted me. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up a meeting, he walked into the conference room with a big smile on his face. "Mia, I have a proposition for you," he said, his voice full of excitement. "We're working on a new initiative at WessonTech, and I want you to lead the project. I believe in your abilities, and I think you're the perfect person for the job." My heart raced. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "I won't let you down, Mr. Wesson," I said, my voice steady but filled with determination. "I'm ready for the challenge." As I walked out of the conference room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I had come a long way from the waitress I once was. And now, I was about to lead a project at one of the most influential companies in the world. This was my time. This was my moment. As the weeks went by, I settled into my new role at WessonTech. Every day brought new challenges, and with each passing day, I felt myself growing more confident in my abilities. I was no longer the same person I had been when I walked into the building that first day. The change wasn't just in my career, it was in the way I saw myself. I was no longer a waitress trying to make ends meet. I was a professional, part of something bigger, and I was making an impact. Richard Wesson had placed his trust in me, and I was determined to prove that his faith in me was well placed. The project he had given me to lead was ambitious, one of the company's largest initiatives in years. It was a risky move, but Richard had been clear. He believed in my potential, and he wanted me to take the reins. As daunting as it was, I knew I had what it took. The project was centered around a new software platform that could change the way WessonTech interacted with its clients. The stakes were high, and the pressure was on. But rather than feeling overwhelmed, I found myself excited by the challenge. I had always been the kind of person who thrived under pressure, and this was no different. I spent long hours at the office, working with my team, brainstorming ideas, and pushing forward with every task that needed to be done. It wasn't easy, but every step forward felt like a victory. One evening, as I sat in the conference room reviewing the latest updates on the project, Richard walked in. He had a look on his face that I had come to recognize, determination mixed with a hint of curiosity. "Mia," he said as he approached the table, "how are we doing?" I looked up from the papers in front of me and smiled. "We're on track, Mr. Wesson. We've got a few more hurdles to clear, but everything is moving forward. The team is really pulling together." Richard nodded, clearly pleased with the progress. "I knew you were the right person for this job," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "Keep it up. You're doing great." His words meant more to me than I could express. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't just working on a project. I was part of a team that was reshaping the future of WessonTech, and my contributions were making a difference. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and more work than I could have ever imagined. But with each challenge that came my way, I felt more equipped to handle it. My confidence grew, and so did my relationships with the team. I was no longer the outsider. I was one of them. As the project neared its final stages, the pressure intensified. We were on the verge of presenting our work to the board of directors, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. But I knew that this was it, the moment that would define everything. This wasn't just about me proving myself to Richard. It was about proving to myself that I could succeed in a world that had once seemed so out of reach. The night before the big presentation, I stayed late at the office, running through every detail, checking and double-checking the numbers. It had to be perfect. I had worked so hard for this moment, and I couldn't let it slip away. As I sat in the conference room, reviewing the final presentation slides on my laptop, Richard appeared in the doorway. "Still working, huh?" he said with a smile. I looked up, trying to hide the exhaustion that was starting to creep in. "Just making sure everything's perfect," I replied. "You've got this," Richard said confidently, walking over to the table. "You've done the work, Mia. Now it's time to let it shine. His words were simple, but they carried a weight of meaning that settled deep in my chest. I nodded, taking a deep breath. The next morning, I stood in front of the board of directors, my presentation ready. As I spoke, I felt the years of hard work, the late nights, and the sacrifices all culminate in this one moment. And when the presentation ended, the room was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, one by one, the board members began to nod, impressed with what we had accomplished. Richard was the first to speak. "I think we've just witnessed something great," he said, his voice filled with pride. "This is the future of WessonTech." The room erupted into applause, and I stood there, feeling a mixture of relief and exhilaration. This was my moment. This was the moment where everything had changed. And it wasn't just about the job, the project, or even the recognition. It was about the fact that I had finally found my place, a place where I belonged, a place where my efforts had real meaning. As I walked out of the conference room, my heart was still racing. I had done it. And this was just the beginning. It had been a few months since that pivotal day when I stood before the board of directors and presented the project that would define my career at WessonTech. The excitement of that moment had started to settle, and I found myself adjusting more comfortably into my new role. As time passed, I began to see how much I had grown. What started as a leap of faith had turned into something far more substantial. I had been part of a team that shaped the future of the company, and that feeling of accomplishment still lingered every time I walked into the office. But the more time I spent at WessonTech, the more I realized that I was not just changing my life. I was also changing the way others saw me. There was a noticeable shift in how my colleagues interacted with me. The respect I had earned from Richard and the board was beginning to trickle down, and I could feel it in the way people spoke to me, the way they asked for my opinions. I wasn't the invisible waitress anymore. I was Mia, a leader in my own right. Richard had been supportive from the start, but now, I could see that he was taking a step back, allowing me more space to lead. He trusted me to make decisions, and that trust made all the difference. One afternoon, Richard called me into his office. I walked in, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be on his mind. He had been so busy lately that I hadn't had much one-on-one time with him, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was about another project or initiative. "Mia, please have a seat," Richard said as he gestured to the chair across from his desk. I sat down, trying to hide the nervous energy coursing through me. "You're doing great work here," he began, his voice warm but businesslike. "I've been watching how you handle things, and I've been very impressed. You've proven yourself in ways I didn't expect. In fact, I'd like to offer you more responsibility." I felt my heart race, a mix of excitement and nervousness. More responsibility? What could that mean? Richard continued, "We're looking at expanding our reach into new markets, and I want you to lead that initiative. This is a huge opportunity, Mia. I believe you're the right person to head this up." The words hit me like a wave. Lead the initiative? I had only just started to feel comfortable in my current role, and now, Richard wanted me to take on something even bigger. My mind was swirling with doubts. Was I really ready for this? Could I handle it? But then, I thought back to everything I had been through to get here. I had worked my way up from nothing, faced countless challenges, and proved that I had what it took. This was just another opportunity to do the same. I took a deep breath, looked Richard in the eye, and said, "I'm ready. I'll do it." He smiled, a look of satisfaction crossing his face. "I knew you would. You've got this, Mia. I have no doubt about it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning and strategizing. I worked closely with the team to assess new markets and determine the best strategies for expansion. It was an exciting challenge, but also one that came with its fair share of pressure. I had always been someone who thrived under pressure, but this time, it felt different. The stakes were higher. The more I dove into the project, the more I realized that this was a defining moment for me. I had the opportunity to leave my mark on the company, to prove once and for all that I wasn't just a waitress turned employee. I was Mia, a leader. As the project took shape, I found myself gaining more confidence. My team was incredible, and with their support, we began to see results. The expansion was moving forward, and I was starting to feel like I had control over the direction we were heading. But even with the success of the project, there were moments when doubt crept in. There were days when I felt like I wasn't doing enough, when I questioned whether I was truly making the right decisions. But each time that doubt surfaced, I reminded myself of the journey I had taken to get here. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that restaurant years ago, unsure of where my future would take me. I was someone who had earned her place. The day of the big presentation to the board finally arrived. I stood before them, presenting the results of our work, knowing that this was the moment that would solidify everything. As I spoke, I felt a sense of pride. This was my vision, my leadership, and it was working. When the presentation ended, Richard stood up first, his voice strong as he addressed the room. "This is the future of WessonTech," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "Mia has led us into new territory, and I couldn't be prouder of what we've accomplished." The room erupted into applause, and in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about the success of the project, it was about my own growth. I had come so far, and I was just getting started. This was only the beginning. The following months at WessonTech were a whirlwind. The expansion project I had spearheaded had been a huge success, and it was clear that my career was moving in a direction I had never imagined. I was no longer just the woman who used to wait tables at a small diner, barely making ends meet. Now, I was leading initiatives that were shaping the future of a multi-billion-dollar company. My confidence had grown tenfold, but with it came new challenges. Richard had given me more responsibility after the successful completion of the expansion project, and now, I was managing a team of highly skilled professionals. They were experienced, driven, and smart. At first I was intimidated. These were the people who had been at WessonTech for years, who had worked on projects with millions of dollars at stake. Who was I to lead them? But as the days passed, I realized that my strength didn't come from being the smartest person in the room. It came from being able to listen, to learn, and to motivate others. I wasn't afraid to ask questions or admit when I didn't know something. I led with humility, and it worked. My team responded well to this approach. We worked together, tackled problems, and found solutions. But as my role grew, so did the pressure. The expectations on me were higher than ever before, and I couldn't afford to make mistakes. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit at my desk, staring at the work ahead of me, overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. I missed the simpler days, when I was just focused on making sure my customers had a good experience, not on multi-million-dollar deals and corporate strategy. But then I would think about how far I had come. I remembered the days when I struggled to pay bills, when I worked double shifts just to make ends meet. I thought about how Richard had given me a chance when no one else would, how he had seen something in me when I was still just a waitress. That thought gave me the strength to push through the tough times. One evening, as I was heading home from the office, I received a text from Richard. "Mia, I need to see you tomorrow morning." Important. My heart skipped a beat. What could this be about? I hadn't expected anything urgent. The next morning, I arrived early at the office, my mind racing with possibilities. When I entered Richard's office, he was already there, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something that looked like concern. "Mia, take a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. I sat down, waiting for him to speak. "I've been thinking about the future of WessonTech, and I believe it's time for a big change," he began. "I want you to be part of that change." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" I asked. Richard paused, looking at me carefully. "I want you to become a senior executive here at WessonTech," he said. "I want you to take on a larger role, not just leading projects, but shaping the vision of the company. You've earned this position, Mia. You're ready for it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A senior executive? Me? It felt surreal. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Richard nodded. "Absolutely. You've shown more leadership and vision than I could have expected. I'm confident you'll do great things." I sat there, stunned. I had worked so hard to get to this point, but I hadn't expected anything like this. Richard continued. "I know this is a big step, and I want you to take some time to think about it. But I'm offering you the opportunity to help lead this company, to shape its future." As I left Richard's office that day, I felt a sense of disbelief mixed with excitement. A senior executive? It was more than I had ever dreamed of. But I knew that with this new role came new challenges. The stakes were higher, and I would have to prove myself all over again. But I was no longer afraid. I had proven to myself that I belonged at WessonTech, that I could lead with integrity and vision. This was my moment. The next day, I called Richard and accepted the offer. "I'm in," I said, my voice steady with determination. "I'm ready to take on this new challenge." Richard's voice was filled with pride as he responded. "I knew you would be." Welcome to the next chapter of WessonTech, Mia. I took a deep breath as I ended the call. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I would truly leave my mark on WessonTech. The road ahead would be tough, but I was ready. I had come a long way from being that waitress at the diner, and now I was on the path to something even greater. Months passed, and with each passing day, I settled deeper into my new role at WessonTech. The transition from leading a small project to becoming a senior executive was not an easy one, but it was everything I had worked for. I could feel the weight of the responsibility every time I walked into the office, but I had come to realize something important. I was no longer that scared, unsure woman who walked through the doors of WessonTech for the first time. I had transformed. The once overwhelming idea of leadership now felt like second nature. The team I managed flourished, and the projects I was entrusted with began to show promising results. There were still challenges, of course. No journey worth taking ever came without its obstacles. But I was stronger than ever, equipped with the tools I needed to face whatever came my way. And, as the months went by, Richard's faith in me never wavered. He checked in often, but not with the kind of oversight that made me feel like I wasn't trusted. Instead, he gave me the space to lead and grow, offering advice when needed, but allowing me to make the tough decisions. He had always told me that I had the potential to lead, and now, with each passing day, I was proving to myself that he was right. The biggest test, however, came when we faced an unexpected crisis. A major contract that we had been working on for months, a deal that would have set WessonTech apart from its competitors, was suddenly at risk. A partner company had pulled out at the last minute, and it seemed like our entire strategy was about to collapse. The pressure was immense, and for the first time since I had become a senior executive, I found myself doubting my ability to pull through. Late one evening, as I sat in my office reviewing the contract details, Richard walked in. I didn't look up at first. I was too focused on trying to figure out a solution. "Mia," he said, his voice calm. "I know this seems like the end of the world right now, but you've handled everything that's come your way so far. You're going to handle this, too." I looked up, meeting his gaze. His confidence was unwavering, and for the first time, I realized how much of a difference it made to have someone believe in you, especially when you doubted yourself. "But what if we can't fix this?" I asked, the worry evident in my voice. Richard smiled slightly. "Then we'll find another way. But I believe in you, Mia. You've proven time and again that you can handle whatever comes your way. This is just another challenge, and you'll come out on top." His words were exactly what I needed to hear. With renewed determination, I rallied my team and put together a strategy to salvage the deal. We worked around the clock, negotiating with other potential partners and reworking our proposal. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I wasn't sure we could pull it off. But as we got closer to the deadline, I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. In the end, we managed to secure a new partner, one that not only made up for the loss of the previous one, but also opened doors to new opportunities. The crisis was averted, and the company was once again on track to meet its goals. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where I proved not only to Richard but to myself that I truly belonged in this world. The road had not been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but I had learned something invaluable through all of it. The true test of leadership wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about how you responded to it. I had faced my doubts, my fears, and the obstacles that came with success, and I had come out stronger. As I looked back at everything I had achieved, from the days spent waiting tables to the corporate boardrooms, I realized just how far I had come. And in that moment, I knew that this was only the beginning. WessonTech had become my home, and I was ready for whatever came next. It wasn't just about being successful in my career anymore. It was about being a part of something bigger, something that would continue to grow and evolve. I had earned my place here, and now, I was going to make sure I left my mark.